the Galactic Empire's greatest mistake. The execution chamber aboard the Imperial Dreadnought, Dominion's pride, gleamed under harsh white lights. Billions across the galaxy watched through their neural feeds as 17-year-old Maya Chen stood defiant in energy shackles, her dark hair matted with dried blood from 3 days of interrogation. Emperor Vexcar himself presided over the broadcast, his chitinous frame towering over the execution platform. His 4 amber eyes reflected the cold satisfaction of absolute power as he addressed the galaxy through quantum transmitters that reached every inhabited system within the Empire's vast domain. "Citizens of the Galactic Empire," his voice resonated through translation matrices, reaching species across 1,000,000 worlds. "Today, you witness the price of defying our eternal order. This human child dared to strike against Imperial authority. Let her death serve as a reminder that no species, no matter how primitive, can challenge our supremacy." Maya lifted her head, meeting the Emperor's gaze without flinching. At 17, she had already lived through the destruction of her colony world, watched her parents vaporized by Imperial plasma cannons, and survived as a refugee in the underground resistance. The scars on her arms told stories of battles fought in asteroid mining facilities and abandoned space stations. "You call us primitive," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's amplification systems. "But you're about to learn what humans do when you push us too far?" The Emperor's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. Brave words from a soon-to-be corpse. "Your species has been nothing but trouble since we incorporated your pathetic worlds into our domain. Emotional, illogical, refusing to accept your place in the natural order. Today, we begin the systematic eradication of human colonies. Your execution is merely the opening ceremony." Maya's execution had been planned as a grand spectacle. The Empire ruled through fear, and public executions of resistance fighters served to crush the spirit of rebellious populations. But Maya Chen was special. She had done something no one in galactic history had ever accomplished. 3 weeks earlier, Maya had infiltrated the Imperial Data Core on Kepler Station. While security forces hunted resistance cells throughout the facility, she had accessed the Empire's most classified military database. What she found there changed everything. The Galactic Empire, for all its technological superiority and vast resources, had a fatal weakness. Their entire military infrastructure depended on a single quantum communication network called the Neural Web. Every ship, every weapon system, every administrative function across their 1,000-world empire connected through this network. The Emperor himself was directly linked to it. His consciousness expanded across the galaxy through quantum entanglement. Maya had discovered the network's core vulnerability buried deep in encrypted files. The system's designers, confident in their technological supremacy, had never considered that a primitive species might understand quantum mechanics well enough to exploit their network's fundamental flaw. They had built their empire on a foundation of sand. During her infiltration, Maya had done more than just gather intelligence. She had planted something in the system. A simple piece of code, elegant in its simplicity, written in base human mathematics. It was designed to activate exactly 47 minutes after her death, triggered by the cessation of her biological quantum signature. The Empire had captured her during her escape attempt, but they had no idea what she had accomplished. They saw only a teenage human girl, another terrorist to be made an example of. They never bothered to investigate what she might have done during her brief access to their systems. Now, as she stood facing execution, Maya thought about her younger brother Tom, killed in the bombardment of New Geneva Colony. She thought about her best friend Sarah, who had died in Maya's arms after an Imperial raid on their refugee camp. She thought about the millions of humans scattered across the galaxy, living in fear under Imperial oppression. "Any last words, human?" Emperor Vexcar asked, his voice dripping with contempt. Maya smiled, an expression that sent an unexpected chill through the watching crowd. "Just 7 words," she said. "You should have left us alone." The Emperor gestured to his executioner, a towering mechanical construct with plasma cannons for arms. The crowd fell silent as the machine powered up its weapons, energy crackling between metallic fingers. "Citizens of the Empire," Vexcar declared, "witness the end of human resistance." The plasma blast struck Maya center mass, her body disintegrating in a flash of superheated particles. Across the galaxy, billions watched as the young human simply ceased to exist. Another victim of Imperial justice. Emperor Vexcar raised his arms in triumph. "Let this be a lesson to all who would challenge our authority. The Galactic Empire is eternal, our power absolute. No force in the universe can threaten our dominion." In the Imperial Command Center, Admiral Zekthar monitored fleet communications across the galaxy. Routine reports flowed in from patrol ships, garrison commanders, and planetary governors. Everything appeared normal. The execution had proceeded flawlessly, and already reports suggested a pacifying effect on rebellious populations. The Admiral's satisfaction was interrupted by Lieutenant Voran, a young officer monitoring deep space communications. "Sir, I'm detecting some unusual quantum fluctuations in the neural web. They started about 10 minutes ago and seem to be intensifying." Admiral Zekthar barely glanced at the readings. "Probably just resonance from the broadcast transmission. Executing someone on live feed across 1,000,000 worlds creates some network strain." But Lieutenant Voran frowned at his displays. The fluctuations weren't random. They formed a pattern, something that looked almost like mathematical progression. He called up additional monitoring systems, diving deeper into the network's quantum substrate. Meanwhile, in a hidden bunker on the asteroid colony of Ceres 7, Dr. Elizabeth Warren watched the execution with tears streaming down her face. Maya had been like a daughter to her, one of the brightest young minds she had ever encountered. The girl's understanding of quantum mechanics had been intuitive, almost supernatural. Dr. Warren had been Maya's mentor in the Resistance, teaching her advanced physics in stolen moments between raids and battles. She had watched Maya develop theories about quantum consciousness that challenged everything the scientific community thought they understood about the nature of reality. 3 weeks ago, Maya had come to her with a wild theory about the Imperial neural web. She had somehow identified a mathematical relationship between quantum consciousness and network stability that suggested the entire system could be vulnerable to what she called a consciousness cascade. "Elizabeth," Maya had said, "what if consciousness isn't just an emergent property of complex systems? What if it's a fundamental force like gravity or electromagnetism? And what if the Empire's network is actually a single, massive conscious entity?" Dr. Warren had been skeptical. The idea that the neural web possessed some form of consciousness seemed far-fetched. But Maya's mathematics were sound, her reasoning logical despite its radical implications. "If I'm right," Maya had continued, "then introducing a consciousness termination event into the network's quantum substrate could create a cascade failure. The network would essentially experience death on a galactic scale." Now, watching her protégé's execution, Dr. Warren realized that Maya must have attempted to implement her theory. The girl had sacrificed herself to plant some kind of quantum virus in the Empire's most critical system. Back on the Dominion's Pride, the celebration was beginning. Imperial officers congratulated themselves on a successful demonstration of power. The Emperor had retired to his private chambers, directly connecting his consciousness to the neural web to monitor reactions across the galaxy. But 47 minutes after Maya's death, something extraordinary happened. Lieutenant Voran's monitoring station erupted in alarms. The quantum fluctuations he had been tracking suddenly exploded into a cascading wave that ripped through the neural web at faster-than-light speeds. What had started as mathematical progression became a devastating digital hurricane. "Admiral!" Voran shouted over the chaos. "The entire network is collapsing." On his displays, Admiral Zekthar watched in growing horror as communication nodes across the galaxy went dark. Fleet coordination systems failed. Weapon control networks crashed. Administrative computers shut down in a rolling wave of digital death that spread outward from the execution chamber like ripples in a pond. The collapse wasn't random. It followed specific pathways through the quantum substrate, targeting the network's most critical functions with surgical precision. Whoever had designed this attack understood Imperial technology better than the Empire understood it themselves. In his private chambers, Emperor Vexkar screamed as the network collapse hit his enhanced consciousness like a physical blow. His mental connection to the Empire, the source of his godlike awareness and control, was being severed system by system. For the first time in centuries, he felt truly alone in his own mind. Across the galaxy, the effects were immediate and catastrophic. Imperial warships found themselves unable to coordinate attacks. Orbital defense platforms went silent. Communication with remote colonies simply stopped. In the span of minutes, a technological civilization that had dominated the galaxy for millennia was reduced to scattered, isolated fragments. Maya's virus was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to destroy the network through brute force, it introduced a mathematical concept that the system couldn't process: the termination of consciousness. The network, designed to mimic and amplify the Emperor's awareness, began experiencing what could only be described as digital death. As the cascade spread, it carried with it something else that Maya had embedded in her code: information. Every classified file, every secret document, every hidden atrocity committed by the Empire was suddenly broadcast across what remained of the communications network. The galaxy learned the truth about Imperial rule, about the systematic genocide of rebellious species, about the Emperor's plans for total domination. Rebellion erupted simultaneously on 1,000 worlds. Species that had been held in check only by fear of Imperial retaliation suddenly realized that the Empire's mighty fleets could no longer coordinate their responses. Local Imperial garrisons found themselves isolated and outnumbered. Dr. Warren watched the cascade through her own monitoring equipment, tears of pride and grief mixing on her cheeks. Maya had done it. The impossible had become reality. A 17-year-old human girl had brought down the most powerful empire in galactic history using nothing but mathematics and the one thing humans possessed that their oppressors never understood: the willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. The neural web's death throes reached every corner of Imperial space. On the capital world of Vexkar Prime, ancient defense systems that had protected the Emperor's throne for 1,000,000 years simply stopped functioning. The planetary shield generators went dark. The orbital fortress network lost coordination and began firing on each other in automated confusion. Emperor Vexkar, his consciousness now trapped in his biological body for the first time in centuries, faced a reality he had never imagined possible. His empire was crumbling around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Maya Chen had been right about one thing. They should have left humanity alone. Because when humans decided to fight back, they didn't just rebel, they evolved, they adapted. They found ways to turn their enemies' strength against them, and sometimes they were willing to die to make sure the lesson stuck. The execution that was meant to crush human resistance had instead triggered the Empire's total collapse. In 47 minutes, everything changed. The galaxy would never be the same. The hour that changed everything. The Imperial Command Center aboard the Dominion's Pride had transformed from a place of celebration into chaos incarnate. Admiral Zekthar stood frozen before the main tactical display as red warning indicators spread across the galactic map like blood poisoning through a body. Each blinking light represented a failed communication node, a crashed system, or a lost connection to Imperial authority. "Status report!" he barked at his officers, but the responses only deepened his horror. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Second Fleet in the Andros sector." "Kepler Station has gone dark, Admiral. No response to any frequency." "The Vexcar Prime orbital defenses are firing on each other." Lieutenant Voran worked frantically at his station, trying to trace the source of the cascade failure. What he found defied everything he understood about network security. The collapse wasn't moving through normal communication channels. It was propagating through the quantum substrate itself, following pathways that shouldn't even exist. "Admiral!" Voran called out, his voice trembling with disbelief. "The collapse isn't random. It's following a mathematical pattern. Someone programmed this." Admiral Zekthar rushed to the lieutenant's station, studying the data streams flowing across multiple monitors. The pattern was there, hidden in the chaos, but unmistakably deliberate. Equations written in base 10 mathematics, a system so primitive that Imperial computers barely recognized it. Yet somehow, these simple human numbers were unraveling the most sophisticated network in galactic history. "How is this possible?" Zekthar demanded. "Our security protocols should have detected any intrusion." "Sir," Voran's mandibles clicked nervously, "the code isn't attacking our security. It's using our own quantum consciousness simulation protocols against us. Whoever wrote this understood our network better than we do." In the Emperor's private chambers, Vexcar writhed in agony as his enhanced consciousness continued to fragment. For 800 years, his mind had been expanded across the galaxy through the neural web, allowing him to experience the thoughts and sensations of billions of subjects simultaneously. The sudden severing of those connections felt like having limbs torn from his body. His personal guards stood helplessly as their emperor clawed at the neural interface ports embedded in his skull. The devices that had once made him godlike were now instruments of torture, sparking and failing as the network collapse reached even the most protected systems. "Disconnect me!" Vexcar screamed. "Sever the links!" But his guards couldn't comply. The disconnection procedures required network access that no longer existed. The Emperor was trapped, experiencing the death of his digital consciousness in real time. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Cascade's effects were triggering responses that the Empire had never imagined possible. On the mining world of Targon 5, human slaves who had toiled in underground facilities for decades suddenly found their electronic shackles deactivating. The automated guard systems that had kept them imprisoned simply stopped functioning. Marcus Torres, a former Earth Marine who had been captured 15 years earlier, felt his control collar power down with a soft click. Around him, hundreds of other humans stood in stunned silence as their bonds fell away. The mine's security doors hung open, their locks disabled by the network failure. "This is our chance," Marcus whispered, hardly daring to believe it. He had dreamed of this moment for 15 years, but had never imagined freedom would come from a technical malfunction. Within hours, the liberated humans had armed themselves with mining equipment and begun moving toward the facility's communication center. If the Empire's network was truly down, they needed to coordinate with other resistance groups while the opportunity lasted. Similar scenes played out on worlds throughout Imperial space. The network collapse wasn't just disabling military systems. It was creating a communication vacuum that rebels everywhere were racing to fill. On the corporate world of Nexus Station, Dr. Sarah Kim had spent 3 years in an Imperial research facility, forced to develop weapons technology for her captors. When the station's security grid failed, she didn't hesitate. She accessed the facility's experimental communication array and began broadcasting on every frequency she could access. This is Dr. Sarah Kim transmitting on all channels. The Imperial network has collapsed. Repeat, the Empire's control systems are down. All resistance cells, all freedom fighters, all oppressed peoples. This is our moment. Rise up now while they cannot coordinate their response. Her message, transmitted through local networks that still functioned independently, reached resistance groups across 3-star systems. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Back on the Dominion's pride. Admiral Zekthar faced the impossible task of maintaining command without the tools that had made Imperial dominance possible. His ship's individual systems still functioned, but coordination with the fleet was impossible. Orders that should have reached subordinate vessels in seconds now took hours to transmit through primitive radio frequencies. "Sir," Communications Officer Veltar reported, "we're receiving multiple distress calls from Imperial installations. Rebellions have broken out on Kepler Station, Nexus Station, and at least 40 other facilities. Local commanders are requesting immediate reinforcement." "How can we respond?" Zekthar demanded. "We can't even contact our own fleets. Every ship is operating independently." The Admiral stared at the tactical display, watching as red zones of rebellion spread across the map. Without the neural web's coordination capabilities, the Empire's vast military machine had been reduced to scattered individual units. Each ship, each station, each planetary garrison was now fighting alone. Lieutenant Vor-On looked up from his analysis station with growing alarm. "Admiral, I've identified the source of the cascade. It originated from this ship. Someone introduced the virus during the execution broadcast." The implications hit Zekthar like a physical blow. "The human girl. She did this somehow." "It's impossible, sir. She was in custody for 3 days. Our security teams monitored her constantly." "Then how?" Zekthar's voice rose to a shout. "How did a primitive human child destroy our empire?" Vor-On pulled up his analysis of the virus code, studying the mathematical structures that had triggered the cascade. "Sir, this isn't just code. It's a consciousness termination algorithm. Someone found a way to make our network experience death." The concept was so alien that most Imperial officers couldn't grasp it. Their understanding of consciousness was purely biological. The idea that a digital network could possess awareness, much less experience mortality, challenged everything they believed about the nature of existence. But humans understood consciousness differently. They had always wondered whether digital minds could truly think and feel. Maya Chen had taken that wondering and turned it into a weapon. On Earth's surviving colonies, the news of the Empire's collapse spread like wildfire. Human settlements that had hidden in the shadows for decades suddenly emerged, their leaders coordinating through quantum communicators that operated independently of Imperial networks. Captain James Patterson commanded a small fleet of human ships that had been conducting guerrilla raids against Imperial supply lines for 5 years. When his communications officer reported the network collapse, he couldn't believe it at first. "Confirm that again, Lieutenant." "Sir, Imperial coordination networks are down across the board. Their fleets can't communicate with each other. It's like their entire command structure just vanished." Patterson studied the tactical display showing Imperial ship positions throughout his sector. Vessels that had moved in perfect coordination just hours ago now drifted aimlessly, their captains probably struggling to understand what had happened to their network. "All ships," Patterson transmitted to his small fleet, "prepare for Operation Thunderbolt. We've been planning this attack for 2 years, waiting for the right moment. I'd say losing their entire communication network qualifies." The human fleet moved toward the Imperial Supply Depot at Gamma Station, a facility that had been considered impregnable just that morning. Without network coordination, the station's defensive fleet was just a collection of individual ships. Similar attacks began simultaneously across human space. Resistance groups that had spent years hiding from Imperial sensors suddenly emerged like a pack of wolves sensing wounded prey. They struck at supply lines, communication nodes, and isolated garrison forces. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical attacks. Imperial forces that had ruled through technological superiority suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered by supposedly primitive opponents. The confidence that had sustained them for centuries evaporated as they realized how dependent they had become on their centralized network. In his chambers aboard the Dominion's Pride, Emperor Vexkar finally managed to disconnect himself from the failing network interfaces. The process left him weak and disoriented, his consciousness confined to his biological brain for the first time in 8 centuries. He felt claustrophobic, trapped in his own skull. His advisors found him hours later, huddled in a corner of his vast chamber, staring at screens that showed the continuing collapse of his empire. The godlike being who had ruled 1,000,000 worlds was now just another frightened alien, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. "Your Magnificence," his chief advisor ventured carefully, "we must consider evacuation. The rebellions are spreading faster than we can track them." "Evacuation?" Vexkar's voice was barely a whisper. "Evacuate from my own empire? The network collapse has crippled our response capabilities. Without coordination, our fleets cannot mount effective counterattacks. Local commanders are falling back to defensive positions." The Emperor looked at the tactical displays showing rebellion after rebellion erupting across his domain. Each red indicator represented thousands, sometimes millions of his subjects rising against imperial rule. The fear that had kept them subjugated was gone, replaced by hope and fury. "How?" he asked weakly. "How did one human child do this to us?" His advisor had been studying the preliminary reports about the Cascade virus. "Magnificence, the preliminary analysis suggests that the human girl, Maya Chen, understood our network architecture in ways that our own designers did not. She found a vulnerability that we never knew existed. A 17-year-old human child outsmarted our greatest technological minds?" "It appears so, Magnificence. The virus she introduced was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of attacking our defenses, it convinced our network that it was dying. The cascade was the network's own response to perceived mortality." Vexkar closed his 4 eyes, trying to comprehend the magnitude of his failure. His empire had fallen not to superior weapons or larger armies, but to the mathematical insights of a teenage rebel who understood something fundamental about the nature of consciousness that his species had overlooked. Across the galaxy, human resistance leaders were beginning to coordinate their efforts. Dr. Elizabeth Warren had established contact with dozens of rebel groups, using quantum communicators that operated outside imperial frequency ranges. The scientist who had mentored Maya Chen was now helping to organize the largest coordinated uprising in galactic history. "Maya's sacrifice has given us an opportunity that may never come again," she transmitted to resistance leaders across human space. "The Empire's coordination is broken, but it won't stay that way forever. They'll adapt, find alternatives. We need to strike now, while they're still reeling." The response was overwhelming. Human settlements that had been isolated for decades suddenly found themselves part of a galaxy-spanning network of rebels. Ships that had hidden in asteroid belts emerged to join the fight. Weapons caches that had been stored for generations were finally put to use, but the humans weren't the only ones taking advantage of the Empire's weakness. Other species that had been conquered and subjugated over the centuries were also rising up. The Zephyrians, whose homeworld had been strip-mined for rare metals, attacked Imperial mining operations with borrowed human weapons. The crystalline Vorthak used their ability to interface directly with computer systems to crash what remained of Imperial networks in their sectors. The Cascade failure had done more than disable the Empire's technology. It had shattered the myth of Imperial invincibility, showing a galaxy of oppressed peoples that their oppressors were not gods, merely beings with better tools. And when those tools failed, the Empire's fundamental weakness was revealed. Admiral Zekthar received reports of rebellions faster than his staff could process them. The tactical display had become a sea of red indicators, each representing another loss of Imperial control. His own ship remained functional, but it was becoming an island of Imperial authority in an increasingly hostile galaxy. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human resistance. It's on all frequencies, broadcasting continuously." "Put it on screen." Dr. Elizabeth Warren's face appeared on the main display, her expression calm and determined. When she spoke, her words carried across Imperial space to every ship, every station, every world where beings had the technology to receive them. "People of the galaxy," she began, "today marks the end of Imperial oppression. A young woman named Maya Chen sacrificed her life to give us this moment of freedom. She showed us that even the mightiest empire can fall when we have the courage to fight back." The transmission continued for several minutes, outlining plans for coordinated resistance actions and calling for all oppressed peoples to rise against their imperial occupiers. It was a declaration of war delivered by an elderly human scientist, broadcast from a hidden asteroid base to an entire galaxy. When the transmission ended, Admiral Zekthar sat in stunned silence. The Empire was not just facing technical difficulties or isolated rebellions. It was confronting a galaxy-wide revolution, coordinated by enemies they had dismissed as primitive and insignificant. The execution of Maya Chen, intended to crush human resistance, had instead triggered the Empire's complete collapse. In 47 minutes, a teenager's sacrifice had changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever, and this was just the beginning. The new galaxy. 6 months after Maya Chen's execution, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. Where once the Galactic Empire's iron grip had maintained order through fear, now hundreds of independent systems fought for survival, freedom, or revenge. The great Imperial fleets that had once moved as single coordinated entities now operated as scattered battle groups, each captain making desperate decisions without higher authority to guide them. Captain James Patterson stood on the bridge of the Human's Hope, a battleship cobbled together from salvaged Imperial technology and human ingenuity. Through the viewport, he could see the remains of Fortress Gamma 7, once an impregnable Imperial stronghold that had controlled 3 star systems. Now it was twisted metal and crystalline debris, destroyed by a combined force of human, Zephyrian, and Vorthak ships. "Captain," his tactical officer reported, "long-range sensors are picking up Imperial signatures in the Kepler system. Looks like Admiral Zekthar's group trying to re-establish communication with the Outer Rim garrisons." Patterson nodded grimly. Zekthar had become something of a legend among the resistance forces, the last Imperial admiral who still believed the Empire could be restored. For months, he had been attempting to rebuild command networks using primitive radio technology, trying to coordinate scattered Imperial forces into a coherent fighting force. "How many ships?" Patterson asked. 43 capital ships, sir. Still a formidable force." "But no network coordination. They're just individual captains following orders from a flag bridge." Patterson turned to his communications officer. "Signal the fleet. All ships prepare for hyperspace jump. It's time to finish what Maya started." The human fleet that responded to Patterson's call was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships built in hidden asteroid bases flew alongside vessels captured from Imperial forces. Retrofitted freighters bristled with weapons salvaged from destroyed battleships. Most remarkably, the fleet included ships from a dozen different species, all united under human leadership. Dr. Elizabeth Warren observed the fleet's deployment from her command ship, the Maya's Vision. The elderly scientist had become the unofficial leader of the human resistance, coordinating efforts across hundreds of systems. She watched as Zephyrian crystal ships formed up alongside human destroyers, their alien geometries somehow harmonious in formation. "Elizabeth," her communications officer called, We're receiving a transmission from the Vorthak Collective. They've successfully infiltrated the Imperial data core at Nexus Station. They're downloading the complete archive of Imperial atrocities. Warren smiled. The Vorthak's ability to interface directly with computer systems had made them invaluable allies. Over the past months, they had systematically accessed Imperial databases, recovering evidence of countless war crimes. The truth about Imperial rule was spreading faster than the Empire's fragmenting forces could suppress it. "Upload everything to the Galactic Network," Warren ordered. "Every species deserves to know what the Empire did to their people." Meanwhile, aboard the Dominion's Pride, Admiral Zekthar struggled with the impossible task of commanding a fleet without the tools that had once made it possible. His tactical displays showed friendly forces spread across dozens of systems, each group operating independently. Communication delays meant that orders took hours or even days to reach their intended recipients. "Admiral," his aide reported, "we've established radio contact with the garrison at Terminus Station. They're requesting permission to withdraw. Human forces have surrounded the system, and they don't believe they can hold out much longer." Zekthar studied the tactical projection, watching red indicators that marked enemy positions closing in around blue Imperial signatures. Without the neural web's real-time coordination, his forces were fighting blind, reacting to threats they couldn't properly assess. "Deny the request," he finally said. "Every system we abandon makes the next one harder to defend." But privately, Zekthar knew his strategy was failing. The rebels weren't just fighting with superior numbers. They were fighting with something the Empire had never possessed: genuine cooperation between different species. Human tactical flexibility combined with Zephyrian technological innovation and Vorthak digital expertise created a synergy that Imperial doctrine had never anticipated. The battle for Terminus Station became a microcosm of the larger war. Imperial forces, isolated and unable to coordinate effectively, found themselves outmaneuvered by a combined fleet that shared real-time tactical data through quantum communication networks. The humans had learned from Maya's sacrifice, developing new technologies that operated independently of Imperial systems. Commander Sarah Mitchell led the assault on the station's orbital defenses. Her ship, the Defiant, had been built in the asteroid shipyards of Series 7 using plans reverse-engineered from captured Imperial technology. But the human modifications made it something entirely new, faster, more maneuverable, and equipped with weapons that Imperial shields couldn't effectively counter. "All ships, this is Commander Mitchell," she transmitted to the assault fleet. "The station's defense grid is operating on autonomous protocols. They can't coordinate their fire. Attack pattern Delta 7. The combined fleet moved with precision that Imperial officers found unnerving. Ships from different species using different technologies somehow functioned as a single coordinated entity. It was everything the Empire claimed to represent, but had never actually achieved. Within hours, Terminus Station's defenses had fallen. The Imperial garrison, cut off from higher command and facing impossible odds, surrendered rather than face annihilation. It was becoming a common pattern across Imperial space. Isolated garrisons choosing surrender over pointless sacrifice. Emperor Vexkar received news of each defeat in his heavily fortified bunker on Vexkar Prime. The once mighty ruler who had commanded a galaxy now controlled little more than his home system, and even that control was slipping. Rebellions had erupted on 3 of his world's continental regions, supported by weapons and supplies smuggled in by human agents. "Your Magnificence," his military advisor reported with visible reluctance, "Admiral Zekthar's fleet has withdrawn from the Kepler sector. Human forces now control all 7 systems in that region." Vexkar stared at the strategic display showing the steady erosion of Imperial territory. Red zones marking rebel control had expanded across half the galaxy, while blue Imperial regions shrank week by week. What had once been an empire spanning 1,000,000 worlds was now reduced to scattered enclaves desperately trying to survive. "How many systems do we still control?" he asked quietly. "Approximately 12,000, Magnificence. But many of those are contested, and our communication with remote garrisons remains sporadic. From 1,000,000 worlds to 12,000 in 6 months. The mathematics of collapse were as elegant as the virus that had triggered them." Vexcar wondered if Maya Chen had calculated this outcome when she sacrificed herself. Had she known exactly how far the cascade would spread? "Magnificence," his advisor continued hesitantly. "There's something else. We've been monitoring human communication networks. They're planning something they call the Reckoning. Our intelligence suggests it's a coordinated assault on all remaining Imperial strongholds." Vexcar felt a chill run through his chitinous exoskeleton. The humans had proven remarkably adept at turning Imperial strengths against them. If they were planning a final offensive, it would likely be devastating. The Reckoning began simultaneously across dozens of systems. Human-led fleets emerged from hyperspace at Imperial strongholds that had stood unconquered for centuries. But these weren't simple military assaults. The rebels had learned to fight the Empire on multiple fronts simultaneously. Dr. Elizabeth Warren's role in the campaign extended far beyond military coordination. Working with Vorthak data specialists, she had identified every Imperial war crime documented in the Empire's own archives. As human fleets engaged Imperial forces in space, evidence of Imperial atrocities was broadcast on every frequency available. The psychological impact was devastating. Imperial soldiers found themselves defending leaders who had ordered genocide against civilian populations. Alien species that had been told their worlds were liberated learned about the systematic murder of their previous governments. The Empire's carefully constructed propaganda collapsed under the weight of its own documented crimes. On the industrial world of Macron 5, Imperial Governor Thelvas found his authority crumbling as his own subjects learned the truth about their planet's integration into the Empire. Broadcasts from human ships in orbit revealed that the Empire had deliberately poisoned the world's atmosphere to make the native population more compliant. The governor's palace was stormed by his own people before human troops even reached the surface. Admiral Zekthar made his final stand in the Andros Nebula, a region of space where sensor interference limited the rebels' technological advantages. His remaining fleet, 37 ships crewed by the last Imperial loyalists, prepared to face Captain Patterson's much larger human armada. "All ships," Zekthar transmitted to his fleet. "We are the last defenders of galactic civilization. If we fail here, chaos will consume everything our ancestors built." But even as he spoke, Zekthar knew his cause was lost. His ship's crews were demoralized by months of constant retreat. Many had families on worlds now controlled by the rebels. They were fighting not for victory, but simply because they didn't know how to stop. Captain Patterson's fleet entered the nebula with grim determination. The humans had no desire for pointless slaughter, but they couldn't allow Imperial forces to regroup and restart their oppression. The war had to end decisively. "Admiral Zekthar," Patterson transmitted on all frequencies, "this is Captain Patterson of the Human Liberation Fleet. You're outnumbered 4-1. Your empire is gone. Surrender now, and your crews will be treated according to the laws of war." Zekthar's response was immediate. "Captain Patterson, I represent 10,000 years of galactic civilization. I will not surrender to primitives and rebels." The battle that followed was brief, but decisive. Imperial ships, designed for coordinated fleet actions, fought poorly as individual units. Human vessels, built for independence and flexibility, systematically dismantled Zekthar's formation. When the Admiral's flagship finally exploded, taking the last Imperial Admiral with it, the organized resistance to human liberation effectively ended. Emperor Vexakar watched the battle's conclusion from his bunker, transmitted to him by long-range sensors. The destruction of Zekthar's fleet meant that no imperial military force remained capable of significant offensive action. His empire was truly dead, but the humans weren't finished. Dr. Warren had spent months planning for this moment, developing a strategy that would ensure the empire could never rise again. Instead of simply destroying imperial infrastructure, the rebels began transforming it. Human engineers worked alongside Zephyrian technicians and Vorthak digital specialists to rebuild the shattered neural web. But the new network was fundamentally different from its imperial predecessor. Instead of centralizing power in the hands of a single ruler, it was designed to facilitate communication and cooperation between independent worlds. Maya's sacrifice had taught them that concentrated power was inherently vulnerable. The new galactic network was distributed, resilient, and most importantly, controlled by no single species or government. It was designed to serve all galactic civilizations equally. The transformation wasn't just technological. Human diplomats, working with representatives from liberated species, began establishing the foundation for a new form of galactic governance. The Galactic Federation, as it came to be called, was based on principles the Empire had never understood: voluntary cooperation, shared resources, and mutual defense. Dr. Warren found herself appointed as the Federation's first Secretary General, a role she accepted reluctantly. At 73 years old, she had never intended to become a galactic leader, but her moral authority as Maya's mentor and her role in coordinating the rebellion made her the logical choice. "We're not replacing one empire with another," she announced during the Federation's founding ceremony, broadcast to billions across liberated space. "We're creating something new, a galaxy where no species rules over another, where cooperation replaces conquest." The ceremony was held aboard a space station constructed from the wreckage of Imperial ships, orbiting the dead world of New Geneva where Maya Chen had been born. Representatives from 43 species attended, many meeting face-to-face for the first time since their worlds had been freed. Emperor Vexakar's fate was decided by tribunal rather than execution. The evidence of imperial crimes was overwhelming, but the Federation chose justice over revenge. Vexakar was sentenced to life imprisonment, his enhanced lifespan ensuring he would live to see the galaxy flourish without his rule. In his prison cell, the former emperor sometimes wondered about the human girl whose death had triggered everything. Maya Chen had understood something about power that he never had. True strength didn't come from controlling others, but from inspiring them to work together towards something better. The galaxy that emerged from the Empire's ashes was chaotic, often conflicted, but genuinely free. Worlds chose their own governments. Species developed according to their own values. Trade replaced tribute, cooperation replaced submission. Human colonies, no longer hiding in the shadows, became centers of innovation and learning. Earth's survivors established universities on a dozen worlds, sharing the knowledge and perspectives that had made Maya's victory possible. The mathematics of freedom, it turned out, were more complex but ultimately more powerful than the equations of oppression. Captain Patterson, now Admiral Patterson of the Federation Defense Force, often visited the memorial station at New Geneva. Maya's name was inscribed on a quantum crystal that resonated with the harmonic frequencies of the new galactic network. Her sacrifice had not only freed the galaxy, it had shown the way to a better future. The memorial's inscription was simple, written in the base 10 mathematics that had toppled an empire. Maya Chen, age 17. She proved that sometimes the smallest voice can echo across the galaxy. Dr. Warren would end her speeches with words that became the Federation's unofficial motto, a reminder of the price of freedom and the power of hope. Remember, Maya. Remember that freedom is not given. It is taken by those brave enough to sacrifice everything for it. The Galactic Empire had fallen in 47 minutes. Building something better would take generations. But across 1,000 worlds, beings who had never dared to dream of freedom now worked together to make Maya's sacrifice worthwhile. The galaxy was free. The human girl who had died to make it possible would never be forgotten. And somewhere in the quantum resonance of the new galactic network, in the mathematical equations that governed communication between species, Maya Chen's legacy lived on. A reminder that even the mightiest empire could fall when faced with the simple, stubborn human refusal to surrender.